So in the next step, let's take a look at examining our account, campaigns, ad groups, etc. Basically look at our TikTok ad account via the API. And in order to make our first API call, what we need to do is make sure that we're using the access token that we created in the previous video and use that to make our API call. So I'm just going to bring up Insomnia over here. So we had our first call over here where we requested our access token with our auth code, secret, and app ID, and we got back the access token. So I'm just going to copy this over here, and let's prepare a new request over here. So in order to make an API request to TikTok, we need to pass in the access token as a header argument. So it needs to say access token and then our access token. And then we need to specify the content type as well as we're passing in JSON. And that's it. This is what our every request will look like. So all we need to do now is figure out what type of request we want to make. So let's go over to the official TikTok documentation. And I'm now in the campaign management part of the documentation. And you can see here where there is an overview and there's some API reference as well. Let's start with the overview. And let's start with the campaign structure. So this is something you may already be familiar with if you're running ads on TikTok yourself. But as we know this from Facebook or Google, we have a three-tiered structure. So we have a campaign, an ad group. Sometimes this will be called ad set on other platforms. And then we have an ad. And we can see the different parameters or attributes that are being defined on each level. So we have objective and budget on campaign level. We have also budget on ad group level. So there seems to be a possibility to set this on either level. The promoted object, right? What are we advertising? The placement, the audience, and then of course bidding and optimization. And then on ad level, we have ad format, the actual creatives that we're using, text, call to action, etc. So it looks like creatives here in this case are referring to videos and images because text and call to action is mentioned separately. On Facebook, for example, when Facebook refers to something as an ad creative, that technically means the entire user-facing part of the ad. So the video, image, but also any text, the URL, etc. Cool. So let's dive into the API reference over here, and let's take a look at some sample requests. So we can actually get all campaigns. I think this may be a good starting point to get all campaigns belonging to an account. All right, and what we can see here is that in order to get the campaigns, we have this request address over here, which is what we can simply copy and use in our request. I'm just going to copy that over here. This is now my request, and I'm going to rename it to get all campaigns. Cool. So of course, right now, there's no way for the API to know what ad account I actually want to use this for. So in order to find out what your ad account might look like, I've prepared something over here. So as we can see, if you are in your TikTok Ads Manager, you can see maybe you see some data here, maybe not, if you haven't run any ads recently. But what you can do is you can simply head over to the top of the URL, and let me bring this into view. So in the URL, we can see that there is a parameter called AADVID, and this is actually the advertiser ID, or also called account ID. So in the interface, this may be called account ID. Via the API, it's usually called advertiser ID. So I'm just going to copy this over, move this back into place, And let's figure out how we are supposed to make this API call. So as you can see here, in our request header, we need to add the access token, which is what we already did before. I'm not going to reuse this or show you how to do this every single time because this is always the same. But what is important is what are the request parameters, and in particular, what are the required request parameters. So as you can see, next to advertiser ID, it says required. We can scroll down a little bit. Seems to be that that is the only required field. So let's just add it over here on Insomnia and do that over here. Advertiser ID equal to this. So let's see if that works. And yeah, indeed, it does seem to work. So we added the field advertiser ID as a URL parameter over here. Let's see if we can also pass it through as the body, a JSON body. Sometimes this makes it a little bit easier to add multiple fields and attributes. Okay, so that doesn't work. So it seems like this, we need to use this as a URL parameter. So that's what I'm going to do. Advertiser with a question mark, ID equal to this. And we have no body. All right, fantastic. So as we can see, we are now getting back a response, and it looks like we got a code saying 0, which means there's no error. We got a message saying, okay, we have a request ID for this request that we just made. And then the actual output lives in this data field. And there's something called list here. Let's scroll all the way down to see if there is more. Yes. Within the data field, we have something called page info, which tells us that we got a paginated response back, which means that we got a subset of the total number of campaign objects. So you can see there are 12 in total, which means there are 2 pages and the page size is 10. So we would expect there to be another page with 2 campaigns. For now, what we will do is we will simply ask for all fields. So as you can see here in the documentation, it is actually possible to pass in a page parameter. So if I passed in page equal to 2, I would now get the second page of data back, but we can also set a larger page size of up to 1000. So this is what I'm going to do over here and just add it as a parameter. Page size equal to 1000. Right, fantastic. Let's scroll down to verify this worked. And yes, the page size is 1000, but in reality, there are only 12 objects, but means we have all of the different data now in one place.